Pacific Cascade Legal. And today we have our founding attorney, Louis Landerholm, with us to talk about why divorce cases can cost so much. How you doing today, Louis?
Oh, I'm good today. How are you, Steve?
Well, I'm doing well. When I talk to folks about divorce, they usually want to talk about why divorces can take so long or they're so expensive. We talked last month about factors that can affect how long a divorce can take, but today we're going to get into the factors that affect the cost of a divorce case. So before we actually get into talking about why everything costs so much, let's start by briefly going over the different kinds of expenses that can go into a divorce case.
Sure. With any divorce, the main sort of costs are around the court itself. The court fees that are associated with filing, with responding, with asking for certain motions. Then obviously attorney fees are a big part of the expense. But then experts will cost a good amount of money depending on what type of expert, whether you need an accountant or whether you need an appraiser or if you need, whoever it may be. Then additionally, depositions are a piece that is expensive, and during the discovery process when you're trying to gather documents and gather the evidence, all of that can cost money at times. So those are the main factors that will cost money in a divorce.
And imagine, some of these costs are unavoidable. Like just the cost of getting started. So maybe we can talk a little bit about just the cost that can be involved in getting the case up and running.
Sure. The initial part is there's a filing fee. So filing fee, depending on your state and your county, it's, typically around $300, $350, somewhere in there. That's the filing fee to just get started, to prepare documents. It can be, depending on which documents and which hearings that need to be asked for right out of the gate. There can be, 1,000, a couple thousand, 500. It just depends on what needs to get done at the beginning. And that's part of the initial strategy session that we have with our clients to determine, do we need temporary hearings? Do we need an immediate danger? Do we need a restraining order? Do we need, those are the things that will impact the amount of money up front. But there's definitely, a cost associated with just getting things moving at the beginning. And then, serving somebody then is a small amount of money depending on, where the person is and if we have to find them. So, those are the things that will impact the beginning expenses right out of the gate.
Got it. And imagine then, as you move into the case and examine it, there are factors that can go into determining the cost of the divorce, the complexity, etc.
Yeah, of course. The biggest pieces that affect the cost are how amicable the two parties are. If the other side is fighting everything along the way or refusing to give documents, that inevitably makes it more expensive because we have to, ask for a deposition. We have to pay for subpoenas. We have to do these things to go get documents. Whereas if the other side, voluntarily gives those to us, then we can save, thousands upon thousands of dollars. The more complex the asset side of things is, the more expensive it's going to be because it's going to require, potentially evaluations or appraisals. The more contentious a child, custody cases, we may have to go pay for an evaluator. Evaluators alone are $12,000 by themselves to make a recommendation to the court as to who should potentially get custody or what the parenting plan should look like. So, these are things that really are driven by how contentious a case is, and the biggest factor in what makes a divorce, so expensive is that, two people who, used to be, in a relationship and used to be together, we have to pull that apart and divide it. And if if everybody is at each other's throats, it's just going to cost a lot more than it would if we can, reach agreement along the way.
And as you kind of talk about the individual costs, the cost of paying this person, the cost of the legal costs, I think people need to keep in mind also, don't they, that there is a really important legal and financial outcome as a result of all this. So there's a reason you're getting these people. There's a reason you're having legal expenses, because how outcome is important.
Yeah, I mean that's why all of these things become necessary, right? Like a big part of the advice that we give to clients is to help them understand the cost benefit of going down a certain path. Do we need to spend the money to go get an evaluation? Do we need to spend the money to evaluate a business or to get an appraisal on the house? Or are both parties close enough that we can agree on, on a number? The farther apart people are, the more value there is in getting an expert involved to give some guidance, because obviously then it's worth that money. I think the experts say that after a divorce, people have to learn to live on about 40% of the income that they're used to because of the double amount of expenses and splitting everything and all of the above. And so it's important to make sure that things are done correctly and people really understand what they're asking for and what the values are, so that they can feel comfortable understanding their financial position after the divorce.
Looking at attorney fees a little bit. A lot of people like to complain about attorney fees. And as you kind of talked about, they're important because you got to know the case and you got to be able to make good decisions about the case. But I know that one of the things that we do is have others on a legal team who can help the attorney, which can help some of the costs not be quite so high, to ease some of those costs and still do a great job.
Yeah. In our firm, we have a structure that's, similar to, say, like a doctor's office. A doctor's office, you have a doctor who's, coming in and making evaluations and making the diagnosis. But a lot of times you're going to see a PA or a nurse practitioner, down to a CNA. Well, we do the same thing. We have our attorneys who go to court and do all the legal strategy and obviously talk to our clients, all the time. But we also have paralegals who they bill at a lower rate so that we can, push that work down to a lower billable rate so that there's more value for clients. We have legal assistants that do other work that then allows our clients to receive more value out of that time, as opposed to an attorney billing at an attorney rate to do everything. It's more valuable to our clients to be able to have other people involved who can do their part of the process that will inevitably keep the cost lower overall. And that's just one of the ways that we as a firm help to keep that cost as reasonable as possible.
Right. And I know it can be frustrating as an attorney because it's not always in your hands, and it's not even always in your client's hands, because the other side has to be reasonable too. And kind of the discovery, the interrogations, that kind of stuff, may or may not be involved and increase the cost if the other side just doesn't want to cooperate.
Yeah, that's the most difficult part about predicting cost in a divorce, is we have another attorney on the other side and another person on the other side. And most of the time, the two people do not like each other. Which then, inevitably people dig in their heels and they fight over, certain things that then cost a lot of money, for both sides. We can, in a divorce, I always talk to our clients that, we have 5 people in the divorce. We can only control 2, which is ourselves and our clients. The judge and the opposing attorney and the opposing party are outside of our control. Sometimes we're ready to go to court and we're prepared and everything's ready, and the court says, we don't have any time, we're going to bump you out 2 months. Those are things that are outside of anybody's control, but it then costs additional money for clients because now we have to do additional discovery. Now we're having additional conversations. So those are factors that are outside of our control that absolutely impact, how much a divorce inevitably will cost, both parties. And so really, the key to me and the key to our team is to really get into mediation, be prepared for mediation as quickly as possible, because then we have some control over the process. We can start that negotiating process. We can see where the problems are, where the deal breakers are, so that we can help to avoid some of those long-term costs that will pop up as litigation moves forward.
And you mentioned mediation, which just leads to the kind of question of how can you not have it go to trial? Because I would imagine that any case that goes to trial is going to drive the costs up significantly.
Yeah, litigation is the number one factor. I mean, a day in court, if you take all the firms in Oregon, a day in court, could range you from, $2,000 to $10,000 to $20,000. I mean, it gets astronomical because you've got that much time, for a certain number of people every day, plus the prep time, plus everything else. And so, it's not that we don't avoid litigation for the fact of not wanting to go litigate and not wanting to go to court. We help our clients and talk to our clients about avoiding litigation because, number one, the most important thing is then you have more control over the outcome than giving it to somebody else who doesn't understand your life and your world. So that's the number one reason to avoid litigation. And then the cost associated with litigation is absolutely the number two. A day of mediation may cost $1,000, but you're doing it in the 5, 6, 7 month, as opposed to waiting 9, 10, 12 months to get to court and then, doing the rest of the work after that. So, you're avoiding the additional months worth of expense, but then also the large amount of money that is required to get ready for litigation.
Yeah. And I expect you're also saving the money people who don't have to go to court, the experts, in mediation, at least you can summarize them. They don't have to necessarily be there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if we need an expert to go to court, they don't do it for free. So, then they all cost money to go and to testify, and it takes longer, and there's more days. It could turn a half a day, 1 day trial into a 3-day trial pretty easily, just with schedules and with getting people set up to come in to testify.
Yep. So are there ways a client can help reduce costs of a divorce?
Yeah, I think the main things that we talk to clients about is, number one, being efficient in how we communicate. It's not that we don't want to communicate. We want to communicate with our clients, but there are ways that can be more effective from a financial standpoint. And that's, putting all of your questions onto a list and sending those, together at the same time with an attorney. I think booking meetings is more effective than just calling and getting somebody on the phone, where then they were in the middle of doing something else and then have to shift focus. And then that just takes additional time, because time is what we bill for. And so, if we can book that time, then we're going to prepare for it, and that's more efficient and more effective for clients. Sitting down and going over something over, a half an hour, an hour, may seem like a larger expense, at one time, but it actually is less expensive because it's not multiple phone calls going back and forth, playing phone tag, doing those things that then just cause additional time to be spent to do them. And the other thing is that the discovery process, which we've talked about before, is the gathering of documents and gathering the evidence. If we can get that information and we can get those documents organized and, up front, that will save thousands, because then, we're not having to organize them. We're efficiently able to go through and see what we need and be able to prepare, the financial documents for mediation and for litigation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Everyone always wants to know, how much is my divorce going to cost? And that's got to be really hard, because it can be, from a small number to a giant number. But you sort of have to make some sort of a guesstimate how much they're going to need, and a lot of people sometimes think that the retainer, the money you ask up front, is the cost, but that's not really correct, is it?
No, I mean, the retainer is the initial deposit towards fees. So, it's difficult at the beginning. There's a lot of decision trees that we face in a divorce. And so to predict all of those is impossible. So what we do at the beginning with clients is we attempt to explain based on their circumstances. This is kind of the rough estimate. I mean, I've seen cases be 5,000. I've seen them be 200,000. Like, it just depends on the complexity and how long we have to go to, court for, how many times we're going to court, all of those things. But during the intake process, we do try to give a large range. These are the issues. These are the things that are going to impact the cost and the divorce. This is, then we help our clients understand the plan on how to avoid some of those costs. And, ultimately, it's never perfect, but it's about the how we do it. And that's the piece that will help to save money, as opposed to what's actually, ultimately going to get done, because it's more of the process that will cause more of the expense to go up than it is what's actually going on in the divorce itself.
And lastly, I just kind of want to touch on, because again, you hear from people who've been in divorce cases something like, well, I didn't talk to my attorney this month. I haven't talked to them for 6 weeks, but I got a big bill. Just because the attorney's not talking to the client doesn't mean things aren't happening behind the scene. Can you kind of explain a little bit about, the things that happen that don't get seen?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, we know what's going on in divorce. We've helped thousands of people. And so, especially say during the discovery process, there's a lot of work going on to get those documents and get those exhibits and to get, that evidence ready for a court or ready for a trial that we know needs to get done. And, it doesn't require, any sort of input from a client. Now we're projecting forward and helping clients understand that these sort of big chunks of time are coming, but there's a lot of work that we have to do, because this is what we do, is to help people through this process that then needs to get done in order to be prepared and be ready for a mediation or a court case. So it's hard to be specific because it just depends on the case a lot, but inevitably there's going to be a lot of work that the legal team is doing that isn't always seen right up front.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Well, Louis, we've hit our 20 minutes. We have to close, but thank you so much for helping explain in a really clear way, the factors that affect the cost of a divorce. And thank you for being here today.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, thanks.
And thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Anyone has any further questions, you can post it here. You can get connected with an attorney here at Pacific Cascade Legal. And as always, until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and be well.